Virgo.
Okay, so sorry for the technical difficulties, but good evening and welcome everyone again. My name is Tracy Moore. I'm the Communications and Public Education Specialist with the Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority, BMCLA for short. I wish to thank all of you for joining this discussion tonight. We take this opportunity to take a reflective look at the medicinal cannabis industry, which only turned 1 year old on January 18th, 2022. We also use this time to listen to best practices, hear concerns, and focus forward as we move swiftly into year 2. To do so, we have brought together on one platform experts in their relative fields from across the region and in fact across the seas to join us. But first, I want to just share with you just a couple of slides to let you know what we have been doing over the year. Just give me a moment to share my screen with you. Okay, can everyone see the screen? Perfect. So this is our scorecard where we are to date. And let me just make it a little bigger. There we go. So as you can see, over the year, we've done a few things. We've had 2 competency standards for cannabis cultivation development completed with TVET. We have had our license portal launch, and with that, to date, we have 92 applications in the system. We've had strategic linkage with Regional Cannabis Authority. We work really closely with St. Vincent and Jamaica. And we've had things like medical forums with an IRB approved survey. We've had 4 expert groups formulated, 4 training sessions for potential licensees. We've had successful expression for interest for a traceability solution executed and close to completion. We have some industry guides, and that is guides for every license, including a general guide, an application guide, and a security guide. We've had 3 MOUs signed, one with the police, one with the University of West Indies, and one with Tibet. And we have 4 more MOUs in process. We have had 2 draft standards developed by BNSI for packaging and labeling and testing parameters. That's to ensure that the industry is completely safe for our patients. Excuse me. We still have 10 educational materials developed and produced, and 10 events at 70% attendance. We've had more than 750 persons engaged with a whole bunch of forums that we've done. And we've had 41 government partners and stakeholder engagement. And we have 5 online platforms established for public education and stakeholder engagement. Now, there's 2 things you'll see that I left out behind. It is the concierge desk and the National Advisory Board established. I'm going to speak a little bit more about the National Advisory Board and the concierge desk when we speak about the stakeholder engagement. But if you look down at the bottom, you can see there that the breakdown of the licenses or the applicants. We have 79 applications in draft. We have 3 submitted, 3 in initial review, 1 ready to process, and 1 ready for pre-approval, 5 on hold. And on hold could be for any number of reasons. Maybe that you didn't have a certified copy of something that is needed. Maybe your security plan was not up to par. So on hold just means, we stop, we talk to the applicant, let them know what they're missing, and get them back in line to either be for initial review or ready to process. So with that, I just wanted to quickly add to that some of the things that we're thinking of when we talk about forward focus. The BMCLA and the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security have been working to present a paper to Cabinet. Of course, elections happen, things were put on pause, so we are hoping that once things get back up and running, that we can move forward with something, a seed amnesty to support persons who are legacy growers here and also be able to participate in the industry. We are also working to have a germplasm bank, and we're working with the ministry to establish that. We are looking at researching the possibility of including hemp into the industry via the National Advisory Board. So again, remember that, because I'll talk about them in a little bit more detail. And we're very much, part of our core is innovation. And the BMCLA is always interested in working with PPPs to propel innovation, and that's private-public partnerships. We have started and will continue to work with the Ministry of Agriculture to provide a full ecosystem of support for small players, and that's through specialized training, funding, technical assistance, and access to technical input. And of course, training and certification. You saw there in the scorecard, that we've got, I'll go back so you see that we have those competency standards for cannabis cultivation developed and completed. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. It just gives you a quick synopsis of what we have done in the year. Now on to the exciting part. Let me just start by welcoming and thanking my co-facilitator, Sarah. Sarah, give a little wave. Sarah Seal is from Barbados, but lives in Canada. She is the CEO of Seal and Garland Consulting and one of the founders of Cannabis Global Consultants, Inc., both based in Canada. As a business strategist with over 15 years of experience on the international market and 7 years exclusive expertise in the cannabis sector, she assists businesses and international governments with navigating the unique challenges of the industry. During the course of her career, which started in the franchise sector, Sarah has worked with over 34 countries and uses the experience to provide cannabis companies with a broad range of solutions, including business strategy. So she's a good person to know. HR and organizational structuring is also part of what she does. Sarah was listed as one of the top 100 business professionals in Canada in 2020 for her work in this industry and made the ultimate list of social CEOs in 2021. So welcome, Sarah, and thank you so much for participating and partnering with me tonight to do this. Before we officially get started with the introduction of our panelists of experts, I wanted to introduce two very special guests. And I am going to apologize right now, Prince Tulani, because I'm going to ask you to pronounce your name. But we have the founder of CIDASA Africa, Prince Tulani. I'm so sorry, but I'm going to ask you to pronounce your name.
No, thank you. It's Prince Tulani Mkhecha. It's a Ndebele name.
Okie doke, thank you.
Thank
you. We also have from Green Lava SPG Corporate, Kevin Green of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Guys, I invite you to participate in all three sessions tonight to give your perspectives as you are on the ground in your own territories and can speak to how you are dealing with all of these topics that we're going to tackle tonight. I also invite those who are watching to put your comments and questions in the chat, and we will try our best to get some of them answered at the end of each session. So let's get started with the first session, which is the regulatory environment. Before I officially hand over to Sarah, I just wanted to give you a bit of a background about our own regulatory framework. There are 8 licenses under our regulatory framework, with 2 of them having tiers to accommodate the smaller entrepreneur. That's in cultivation and processing. Cultivation has 4 tiers, from under, oh God, how do I forget that? There are 4 tiers in cultivation and 3 in processing. I'll get back to you on the size. Anyone over the age of 18 from Barbados or the CARICOM member states and internationally can enter the industry directly, or you can do it indirectly, which means no license, no touching the plant. The regulatory framework we have here in Barbados also ensures for local government at all, local involvement at all levels to have that 30-70 split. What that means is that as a Bajan, you can own 100% of any medicinal cannabis company set up under the regime. Additionally, though, Section 32(4)(f) of the Act stipulates that 30% of any international company, partnership, or cooperative society must be owned, and that's real direct ownership by a citizen of Barbados, a permanent resident of Barbados, a person with immigrational status, or a citizen of CARICOM member state. However, this does not apply to R&D and lab licenses, but the reason that is set up is to ensure that there is that foundation of having local ownership. The regulatory framework does prohibit anyone with an indictable offense from entering the industry. And to be clear, the indictable offenses are listed, and they include the Anti-Terrorism Act, the Drug Abuse and Prevention and Control Act. And I want to make clear about this one. This means Indictable act meaning large possessions, intent to traffic or caught trafficking, those kind of huge, heavy ones. However, the act was just amended to provide for payment of a fixed penalty for persons found with small quantities of cannabis. And that means that person does not have an indictable offense. They can still enter the industry. Other indictable offenses, Firearms Act, Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism, Theft Act, and Trafficking of Persons Prevention Act. So big things. Lastly, the regulatory framework also allows for the BMCLA to make policies, procedures, and guidelines to establish the industry, and we are a learning industry. Chantal always says that. So something like that kind of piece in the regulatory framework allows us to be a little bit more flexible. So that gives you, before we start the conversation, kind of a line of sight of where we start from here in Barbados. So with that, I hand over to you, Sarah, to get the discussion started.
Great, thank you so much, Tracy. So before I introduce our panelists, I just kind of want to make the point that the regulatory challenges that are being faced in Barbados right now, they're global challenges. They're not Barbados specific. Every single one of us, we've brought together some experts from around the world. We've got David Hyde from Hyde Advisory. David's up in Canada and working with at least 14 other countries right now on regulatory affairs and licenses. I'll let him kind of kick things off and tell you a little bit about that. From Jamaica, we have Annette Henry, who is an attorney at law. From Trinidad and Tobago, we have Marcus Ramkassoon. I think everybody knows Marcus in this industry, no matter what country you're from. Very well known, travels quite widely. And from the USA, we have Charles Rutherford. And then, of course, Prince Tulani and Kevin to give the South African and the SVG regulatory framework as well. Please feel free to jump in at the end so we can really just discuss out really what we're trying to look at is what are the challenges that you're facing or that you're seeing in your particular jurisdictions, and what are the solutions on the horizon. So David, if you don't mind kicking us off with that, because Canada really we have the longest history, and we're still getting things wrong, right? That's just the reality of it. So we'll start off with you.
Sounds great, Sarah. You hearing me okay?
Yeah.
Great, thanks so much. So it's David Hyde. I'm a global cannabis industry consultant with experience in 19 countries, working on cannabis regulation, licensing, business startup operations, and global cannabis M&A. And my bio's on the internet, so I won't go into the details there. Well, I want to get right into the meat and potatoes, if we may. One of the problems that I'm seeing with regulation of cannabis, over-regulation probably is one of them. You know, I think it's too simplistic to say that cannabis is a plant, so it should be regulated like any other plant or crop. I think that's a little bit simple to look at, but it's also true to say that cannabis shouldn't be treated like a Schedule I narcotic. And I think that most governments come out of the gate with an elevated threshold on regulation. It's very tight. And what we find is that as the industry matures, it reels from that over-regulation. So the solution, and my hope is that more governments around the world that are early adopters look at the experiences from other countries like Canada, US states, other parts of the world, and learn some of those lessons so we don't come out of the gate with regulations that can be a little bit overbearing. Overtaxation is another issue that we've seen, perhaps not as bad in medicinal cannabis in some countries, but at the end of the day, to combat the illicit market, governments have to avoid excessive taxation rates. And I think in some cases, there's some room there for improvement with licensing fees, with tax burdens and things, keeping those as low as possible, starting them low and building them up to the industry needs, not starting high and kind of stifling the industry in some ways. Industry representation is another area that I see some challenges. All too often we see disparate approaches to industry representation. Industry can't speak with one voice. And even in Canada, which has had some form of medical cannabis legalization since 2013, we still don't really have a single representative industry association. So I think governments really need to help facilitate and engage with a single industry association representing all industry participants, and not just the ones with the heaviest wallets, but actually all of the small, medium, and large industry participants. A couple of other ones, research and education, I think is another area that has been a challenge. Most governments that don't do a great job, frankly, of supporting research, excuse me, into medicinal cannabis, and equally, perhaps not a great job of educating physicians who are the ones that are going to need to know about cannabis and be willing to prescribe it to their patients to provide them with the alleviation that cannabis can provide. So seeing government grants for cannabis research in partnership with universities, strong government supported outreach in the medical community, these are really, really important things in my view. And I think the last area, we're a little tight for time, so I can't drill into these ones, but really a lack of understanding sometimes by governments of the regulated industry. When I did research for my master's degree, which admittedly was a few years back now, I studied regulatory theory. And the research there and today still shows that all too often, government regulators really don't understand the regulated industry. And I see that in the medical cannabis sector a lot. So I hope, and the solution in my mind, is governments doing a really good job of industry engagement, truly understanding the industry, its participants, its activities, its challenges, the pockets of risk that they really should be focusing their scarce resources on, which I think will get the best return for their investment. I'll stop there and back to you, Sarah.
That's great. Thanks so much, David. So Annette, if you don't mind, if we hand over to you to talk about the Jamaican experience. I know that in Canada, especially a lot of the feedback that I kind of get when everybody talks about regulatory is Jamaica's got it all figured out, right? Because it's Jamaica. So we know that's not true, but if you could talk a little bit about what you're seeing there.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. I'm Annette Henry, an attorney at law with extensive knowledge in the regulatory environment. I've worked in standards, environment, transport, and my most recent was in the medicinal cannabis industry, where I was the director of licensing at the Cannabis Licensing Authority. In addition to that, I helped to draft and develop the framework in relation to the framework and admission and administration in dealing with the applications, among other things. And I've represented Jamaica in the international and regional sphere as it relates to cannabis. I agree with the sentiments expressed, but in the context of Jamaica, we did make stride in 2015, 2016, when we had the amendment to the Dangerous Drug Act. And in 2016, we saw coming into being the Cannabis Licensing Authority. Many of our friends in the Caribbean, and we welcome that, have looked at what we have done. And they have said, what you have done, Jamaica, what is it that we may benchmark, and what are some of the lessons learned? But notwithstanding that, those steps that we have made, there are some challenges. And I want to commend Jamaica for what it has done so far, but there are some challenges. One of the things that is very important, a government has to live with a legislation or regulation that it puts in place until their amendment. And because of that, it is important for that kind of all-inclusive and all-encompassing approach in developing policies and regulations. And with that, we saw to some extent where persons remain disgruntled. And because of that, sometimes it overshadows the successes. So in addition to that, for example, many of our small-scale traditional ganja farmers, Rastafarians, and grassroots individuals believe that the regulatory framework is not inclusive, and some of the provisions are basically hindrance to them participating in the industry. So definitely what Jamaica is on, I see where steps have been taken, is to see how best they can amend or revamp the regulations to incorporate and include those individuals in specific terms, not general terms. Another thing that is very important is in the licensing and application process, because you also want those with the know-how to drive the industry. For example, research and development is very important, because we have moved from what persons may think just ganja is the little boy on the street or the man on the street. It is medicine, and research and development is going to assist us. But one of the challenges that we're seeing, not many companies apply in Jamaica for the research and development license, because one, they believe that the fee is too much and it is onerous. But what we also find is that universities and other institutions that have the resources the equipment and the personnel, they apply, but the regulation treats them like a regular company. These universities do not have directors and they do not have shareholders in the strictest sense of the regulation. So when an application is made, if you're not careful, their application will language in the system, and then you do not benefit from the research and development. And another area which I've seen that we could work closely on is that research and development will also drive much more than the flower and the oil. We need to see much more coming out of the industry, such as topicals, sublinguals, because many persons are becoming interested in the industry and would require much more than the oil. So what we want is also a mindset that the cannabis plants it's not drugs in that sense. So we're moving from those terminologies where we can speak of a cannabis act rather than amendments to the dangerous act, because the mindset is very important in this emerging industry.
That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Annette. And some of the points that you hit on there, we're going to be covering more on when we talk about stakeholders and the local stakeholders and the place that people have, the community, the destigmatization efforts that they're doing in Barbados in the stakeholders section. I think we're going to touch on a lot of the points that you made there as well. So Marcus, if I can go over to you, because when you talk about research and development and you talk about regulations, I might be playing my hand a little bit, but I think that you also had a hand to play in helping Jamaica develop their regulations. And not sure if I got that wrong, because you were in a lot of the different things. But if you want to give just a brief intro on yourself and what are you seeing in Trinidad now? I know that their progress has halted a little bit, and the other countries that you're traveling to.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Marcus Ramkisoon. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. I am one of the more educated individuals, consultants within the industry, currently holding too many certificates in cannabis studies, and as of recently, a Master of Science degree in Cannabis Science and Commerce. I've been the author for the proposed legislation, primary and subsidiary, meaning regulations also, for a few countries within the region, and I'm glad to see that aspects of that work are now being used within almost all the countries, if not all the countries within the regions that are setting up cannabis laws and regulatory frameworks. Jamaica, as to that question, my early proposed framework back in 2014 was adopted by a company there who was acting very closely with the then government. And as far as I was told, 8 months later, by the then General Secretary, is the first draft of their regulatory framework on that first edition of my proposed regulations. That include export and import. It did not include tracking and monitoring purposely. And we have seen that it did take Jamaica quite a while to put those aspects into place, which are very important aspects in the industry. The returns within the entire region still needs amending, because as an advisor, my job is just to advise. I am not the persons that are choosing what to take from my advice and put into the regulatory framework. I agree with both speakers before, for David and Annette, in the sense that there should not be over-regulation, but as Annette said, regulation must encompass everything that is necessary. Specifically, you find that in making any sort of legislative framework, whether it be primary or secondary legislation, if things are not encompassed specifically, a lot of lacuna or loopholes are left for people to take advantage of in a number of ways. And one of the I suppose the hardest ways, which would then stop a law from being into effect, would be challenging it in court and all that. So making sure that your regulatory framework is up to date and working with the industry that you plan in your country is paramount. Even more paramount, though, is ensuring that your regulatory framework is in line with the international guidelines and obligations. I shouldn't say guidelines, but obligations, because for every country that is signatory to the international drug treaties, those countries must be guided by those treaties as international law when they're making their country law, whether it be regular law or even constitutional law. International law does take precedence. And there are very, very specific guidelines within those treaties guiding how cannabis industries should be operated. I always advise government cannabis authorities to communicate with the International Narcotics Control Board, the INCB, and ensure prior to putting their legislation forward that everything is in line with the international framework and they won't have any problems when it comes to export and imports and all these different things that could be hindered from non-compliance with the international treaties. As for the region, Trinidad is on hold, yes. I do expect that we may start looking at the topic again very soon because the Office of the Attorney General did just ask from certain stakeholders to present some more research on a certain topic close to cannabis. So I expect that the legislation, which is now passed by a joint select committee, will be back to Parliament soon. St. Kitts is about to put out their regulatory framework. I expect within a few months it should be out. Antigua is continuing to amend their framework and is about to, I believe, pass their hemp legislation and framework, which I also wrote for them. And they've separated it because American investors especially are not able to invest in the cannabis industry properly with banking issues, which I'm sure will be covered in the next segment, under cannabis licenses. So they had to put specific hemp licenses. And I'm saying this in advice to any of the authorities that are listening also that, you know, if you're looking at North American investors in the hemp industry, it actually may be wiser to put a separate legislation and separate regulations, maybe even under the same authority, but the licenses cannot say cannabis licenses. They must say hemp licenses since it's now federally legal within the US.
Actually, Marcus, when you talk about federal legalization, sorry to jump in. I know we're all conscious of time, and we have a couple of different areas to get in. But since you mentioned on the US federal legalization, just wanted to jump in and hand it over to Charlie. Because you are in the States. So can you tell us, it's such a big conversation. It's everything that anybody is talking about in Canada is what are the states going to do? When are they going to legalize? When is it going to federalize? When can we go across? Can we cross the borders? Right. And I know for the Caribbean, it's a big subject of conversation as well. So can you tell us a little bit about what's happening there, what the regulatory framework looks like, and just a brief intro on who you are first?
Sure. Thank you for having me here. I appreciate being on such an amazing panel with these esteemed guests. I'm Charlie Rutherford. I am a consultant in the cannabis industry. I'm in Dallas, Texas, which will be the last place on the planet to ever have cannabis, liberal cannabis laws. But I spent 10 years as business development director for a company that had popular products in cannabis, primarily for packaging. And so that's where most of my training is. I now consult for the International Standards Organization, ASTM International. They're a global consensus standards organization. The cannabis subcommittee, which is called D37, has 1,000 members from about 31 countries around the world. And so all the membership is taking the approach that, as Marcus just said, these standards that are being developed by membership need to understand and incorporate as much of the globe as they can, because that's what truly is a global standards organization. So we're very thankful for that kind of representation inside the committee. I also volunteer as the Cannabis Task Group co-chair for the United States National Conference on Weights and Measures. And that leads me directly into where the US is right now. And so right now we're addressing some of the most basic foundational things that should have been addressed before there was an industry. And that's really on the topic of fairness. No matter where you are on the globe, you expect that a transaction is going to be fair, right? You're going to get what you pay for. And that's especially critical in a medical setting where someone is paying good money in the United States, a lot of money, in order to buy a product that's going to give them certain therapeutic benefits. And so this is going to sound really boring, but it ties this all in. And that is the function of moisture in this plant. So when the plant is losing moisture, it's losing value, right? And so we'd all go in, if we bought a dozen eggs and got home and realized one of them was missing, we'd march back to the store and tell them it was missing an egg. Well, here in the United States, the subject of underweight cannabis packaging is absolutely widespread. You have about a 50-50 chance of going in and getting ripped off by something that you buy off the shelf. in the matter of $5, $10, $20 increments. So we'd be really mad if we got ripped off by one egg, but the world somehow isn't really mad when they're getting ripped off by tens or twenties of dollars. So the National Conference on Weights and Measures is addressing two things. The amount of moisture in the cannabis flower is critical. It's critical to the stated therapeutic benefits or the stated cannabinoids and terpenes that are on that label, right? And so as that flower is drying out, people are losing that therapeutic benefit. And so there's an ASTM standard that addresses the ideal water activity range for cannabis flower, which was also backed up by the US's pharmacopoeia. So that's one of the ways that the boring topic of moisture is going to be a big benefit as this moves through the process of the national conference. The other way that moisture is a big deal is, of course, in this fairness in the transaction. We want to make sure that anybody who's spending their hard-earned money to get a therapeutic benefit out of something that they're buying, they should expect that. And so, and what's mentioned on the label should also be what they're getting in reality, because there's tons of stories now about testing companies pulling things off of shelves and finding that there is not nearly the amount of the cannabinoids being claimed on the label. So all to say, it's really coming down to the foundational things. People should get what they're paying for, and they shouldn't get ripped off, and it should be safe, it should be consistent, and it should be high quality.
Yeah, no, those are some great points. And I mean, at the end of the day, when we're talking about a medical framework, we are talking about medical products. So, so the product quality is of utmost importance. So Prince Tulani and Kevin, I wasn't sure if you wanted to weigh in on this. I know that from a St. Vincent point of view, the minister came across the first conference that we did in Barbados. The Minister of Agriculture came across and spoke. You guys had just legalized, and it was powerful. You know, it was to have the government support and the backing at the very beginning, to have decriminalization, the very first thing that was talked about before legalization, the inclusivity of the market over there. I worked with quite a few people in St. Vincent, and that really is, it's setting the tone, and I think it's changing a lot of things. So what are the challenges that you're facing over there, Kevin, just from a regulatory point of view? Because none of the rest of the people on this call, none of the rest of our countries, none of us have that advantage of having the government there at the forefront, and that's the very first conversation.
Okay, just say good night to everyone again. I think we in St. Vincent are very fortunate to have an authority, the medicine authority, to be much on our side as investors and as persons of the country. We had problems with banking, and all those things have been basically regularized. We have problems with regulating in dispensary, which now we have dispensaries open up. Software system to do track and tracing, that was one of our major problems, especially when we want to do proper track and trace. And that was one of our problems, but at this point in time, we can safely say that we have that covered. So because we work along very closely with the medicine authority just to get everything on track. We're very helpful for our neighboring countries as well, because some of our investors are from, for example, from Trinidad. We are from Canada. So we have a very wide group of persons who is very helpful for us as our investors here. But to say that we have that problem that we do not being regularized and we are being stiff-handed, I won't say that we have that here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines at this point in time. I mean, there are things that we can tweak a little, but we are very fortunate here. So I must commend our authority here. So I know Barbados is now coming on stream, and I would like them to, just ask a few questions here and there, and, let us get the industry back and moving. That's mostly I can say on this point in time.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And Prince Tulani, first of all, thank you, Prince Tulani. It is what, 4 o'clock in the morning in South Africa right now?
No, it's like 22 in the morning now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
so
you.
Really
Thank you for the
appreciate-
invitation. Yeah. Thank you for the invitation from the Barbados Medical Cannabis Licensing Authority. My name is Prince Tulani. I'm from South Africa. I am from Cannabis Industry Development Association of Southern Africa, where since 2018, the decriminalization of cannabis by our government, we've been working on the ground with the communities. The challenges that we are facing in Africa or South Africa is a legislative restrictions. There's too much restrictions on the legislation, where we are currently working with the government to sort out that legislation restrictive. We also have no formal seed supply system because of we are relying on growing a bigger number of hemp, so and also pushing the medicinal cannabis sector. So there's no good seed supply. Also, the other thing, the high entry barrier. For people to access licensing is very difficult because it gets very expensive in a way that people who have to enter the market, some of them, they don't have the funds to access the license. So the barriers and the requirements are still very high. We have also a lack of manufacturing capacity. Because of this is a new industry in our country, we lack the capacity for manufacturing. That is why we are relying on other countries, those who are in the front with this industry to assist our country. And this industry, it also has a threat of these big companies coming from overseas, taking over, and you find that all these pharmaceutical companies, which are very big, they come in and take over and dominate the industry, which doesn't benefit the people or of the soil equally. That is why we as CIDASA, we say, let us be between the people and the government and to make sure that this industry is well regulated. Again, we have a limited investment in research and technology development programs. So we need to invest more on the research and the development of the technology of the programs within our communities. So the market challenge also is a problem because of those people who are growing medicinal cannabis or growing industrial hemp. They should know that where are they going to take the product to. So those things, they become a challenge or a threat in our community. So yeah, those are the barriers that we are facing, but we are busy working with government to advise government to make sure that our people are capacitated, our people are well trained. We are more big on education and awareness because we believe that education and awareness will unlock the industry positively. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate everybody's insight. So Tracy, I think if we have time, if we have any questions from the audience for the panelists, we have about 5 or 6 minutes before we have to move on to the next panel. But it would be a good time to see if anybody's put any questions into the chat.
Yes, we do. We do have a question asked. You say it only takes 4 months to get a license, yet it's been over a year and no one has a license. Why is that? So let me just quickly answer that. So it is 4 months guarantee if you have every single thing in order. So if you apply and you have all of your documents, they're certified. What's not certified is approved by, let's say you were trying to get town and country planning to approve, you need that kind of approval. So all of the documents, there's about 12 documents that you need. An operational plan, your security plan has to be on point. Your disposal plan, so any of those things, if there's any discrepancy in any of those things, it pauses the 4 months. And one of the things is to get people to understand that yes, we guarantee 4 months, but that is a guarantee if you have everything together. And it's part and parcel of why we just had the open house, because we found that there were people that while we have opportunity for people to get hold of us and talk to us and get questions and answered and have the guides up and have the website up, that some persons just need that one-on-one, face-to-face to get through those little humps. So that is why there's been no award of a license as yet. But as I said in the scorecard, there is a license up for pre-approval shortly, but everything has paused, and so we're hoping to get back on train with that. But that is the answer to your question. I hope that helps. I also wanted to, before we move on to the next session, is really thank Marcus for pointing out the INCB and having to meet their strict guides in their regulations. I don't think that the average person understands that somehow whatever we set up, as best as we try to be inclusive, we still have to meet the international standards or guidelines. So I really appreciate you, Marcus, bringing that up, because it's very, very important for persons to understand that. I also wanted to remark that for us, we're not Jamaica, we don't have the size land. We are not St. Vincent, we don't have the volcanic ash that assists with soil. And so our thing at the BMCLA really is to move forward with research and development. And that's why one of the very first MOUs that we signed was with the University of the West Indies. So as everyone has said that, you know, research and development is very, very important. That was something that was key to us before. I mean, that was one of the first conversations we had. And so I wanted to make that point, that, you know, it is also very, very important for us, and it's one of our key steads, and we want to be the research and development hub in the region for cannabis. So does anybody have any last minute comments they want to move into?
Yes, I could. In summing up, and based on what you have said there, in summary, I would say that more than anything else, because I'm currently a part of an informal regional dialogue with more than 8 Caribbean countries. And what we need to do, and what I would love to see in the near future, is some form of regional collaboration. For example, we can make the Caribbean, CARICOM, also to be the region in relation to a niche market for tourism, medicinal tourism. In addition to that, Barbados, Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, while we may do things individually, there must be, and I think the time has come, where we have that conversation where we can see how best as a region we can work together. Maybe we can grow it. There's a market in St. Vincent who is more positioned. And in addition to that, the research and development will also help to position us to assist the United Nations to rightly schedule the cannabis plant. And this is where we're going to need a research and development. And persons need much more than the pharmaceutical. We must remember there's a place for nutraceutical. And to support my colleagues, though the conventions are there, we have to look how we are regulating, and are these regulations killing the cannabis business? We have to bear that in mind with our regulation. So I'm looking forward to that original dialogue and collaboration.
Thank you,
That is amazing. And actually, I think it's kind of the perfect sort of segue. Emmanuel, you're in the stakeholder section, which is right next. Did you want to say something about regulations now, or did you want to?
Most definitely.
Oh,
Most.
Go ahead.
Yes. Well, first of all, good night to each and everyone. Greetings in the name of His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Blasted first, Empress was there men in one perfect balance. One critical aspect, only because it's so important and it usually gets overlooked, and this is pertaining to incarceration of a lot of young men and some older ones as well, individuals as a whole, especially here in the Caribbean and especially here in Barbados, who have been victimized as a result of now, although we're discussing ways to bring this medicinal, quote unquote, cannabis industry on stream, they're young men, they're individuals who might still be getting arrested for having, the smallest possession you could think of cannabis as a plant. We not even get into dissecting it and labeling it, but as a plant. And I don't normally hear, what is being done. I know that they did, however, create some kind of I don't even know what you call it, where you can get a lesser fine now. We won't arrest you, but we'll give you a fine. However, if you can't pay the fine, we'll incarcerate you. I'm thinking that something needs to be done regarding that whole approach to dealing with the young men or men who might be being remanded in prison And to be remanded in prison for a year, I was telling the sister, it's $36,000 to keep a man remanded for a whole year for having an ounce of marijuana in Barbados. Is probably worth about 250 US. You know, there's something that needs to be looked into that. I don't know if Jamaica has that problem. I don't know if Trinidad has that problem. I'm sure St. Vincent has that problem, but that has to be looked at and really and thoroughly discussed in order for this whole thing to work. Because to not do that is to almost be, in a sense, just deliberately marginalizing the people, although the idea is to help. So, you know, maybe some discussions could be had on that at a later date. And moving forward, I'm sure that this is something that we can all think about, how to alleviate that issue and put those young men into this whole program to find a better way of, you know, maximizing on the idea of growing and supplying and making sure that it doesn't get dehydrated. And I'm with you, Charlie, on that. I yield.
Thank you, Emmanuel.
Yeah.
Dr. Mosley wanted
beautiful.
to add really
sorry, go ahead.
quickly. Sorry, Dr. Mosley wanted to add very quickly.
Hi, I'm Hardy Mosley. Thanks for having me on the panel. I am a rehabilitation specialist, which means that I am the physician that takes care of patients who the medical establishment has given completely up on. And basically, and during the first years of my career, I was completely an opponent of cannabis and its use in any form. But over the last 5 years, I've become an advocate for it. And since I'm here on the ground with the Barbadian population, I must say that the recreational use of cannabis is still illegal. And as a result of that, this has caused significant stigma, which has made it very difficult to get patients to even agree to use this modality for their treatments. But however, also due to this undeserved stigma, there's a lack of very good medical research. And we are having a hard time getting the medical establishment here to actually believe in the use of medicinal cannabis. The physicians in Barbados largely appear to be very conservative and disinterested. But yet, in spite of this, I am extremely busy in both my public and private practices, especially since most of my colleagues send me chronic pain patients who they do not know what to do with. And it's not uncommon for me to have a patient that comes in with 8 years of chronic pain, and they say that they can't sleep, and the pain is intense. And I must say that of those patients, I would say a full 20% of them are actually my medical colleagues, both doctors and nurses. And in a different dispensation, at least 30% of them are women with menstrual problems as well as menopause. And I've been pleasantly surprised when I prescribe medicinal cannabis at the response I've been getting. And I must say that I must give thanks to the BMCLA, as well as my good friend, Mr. Douglas Trotman, may he rest in peace, who had discovered a law in the 1990s which enables us to prescribe cannabis easily. And as a result of that, we've been able to utilize products as they come into the pharmacy, and patients have been loving them. So that's basically what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mosley. Sarah, this is a great transition for you.
Yeah, they've gone on to the next panel already. I love it. I absolutely love it because
guys, I know the guys.
We're behind time. We're really behind time, and we know that people are only here for the second session, so we do have to move forward.
So we are going to move on to the local stakeholders, and I mean there was no, like Carly said, there was no bigger local stakeholder with a bigger voice than Douglas Trotman. And I made Douglas a promise when I first met him that any time that I'm on a stage or I'm talking about Barbados or I'm talking about medicinal cannabis, that I'm going to mention his wife, Kathy Ann, because without the fight for Kathy Ann and without Dr. Mosley's help, none of this would actually be happening, right? We wouldn't be having a conversation in Barbados around medical cannabis legalization if it wasn't for Douglas. So he has a strong voice. He had an opinion on everything. But one of the greatest things that he did was, as a stakeholder, is he did something as well. He didn't just sit back and complain and say the government isn't doing anything and, you know, blah, 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 everything is not going the way that I want. He actually did something. He lobbied for change. He He came and supported the conferences that we did. He helped with the destigmatization effort. Emmanuel is exactly what you're talking about with the decriminalization effort in St. Kitts, in Jamaica, in Barbados. I mean, he was one of the strongest voices that was fighting for that. So as we move over into the local stakeholder conversation, we really want to, which I'll hand over to Tracy so she can introduce everybody. Just kind of keep that to mind, that the conversations that we're having on how can we be better as a nation? How can we be better as a global industry? How can we get the local stakeholders really participating? And Marcus, you can feel free to jump in on this one as well. Sorry we had to cut you off and jump over, but you can absolutely, because I know you've got a lot to say on this subject as well.
Okay, so
I'll hand it over to you then, Tracy.
The second session is a stakeholder engagement, engaging local communities, what has worked, best practices, models, and emerging models. So let me first introduce the panel. From Jamaica, I'd like to welcome Douglas Gordon, Canex Jamaica founder and Silo Wellness CEO. As well, I don't know if he's here, but M. Omari Jackson, from the CEO of Ganja Activist, is also supposed to be here, but I don't see him. From Barbados, welcome Angela Knight, attorney at law and part-time tutor, and you just heard medical doctor and rehabilitation specialist, Dr. Mosley. And of course, Emmanuel, please forgive me, I cannot pronounce your last name.
Barilia.
Barilia. Brilliant. Okay, so thank you all for joining us this evening. Just a reminder that this is the largest group session with 5 persons. And then, of course, we have St. Vincent and South Africa to lend their voices. So may I kindly ask that we keep it respectful of time, constructive of opinion, and collaborative on facts and best practices. You would have seen the scorecard, which would have shown you some of the outreach efforts that we have done to get stakeholders not just educated, but involved. So we've had the town hall. We were going to have a second one, but COVID happened. We had a number of virtual forums that were specific to each license type, as well as security. We've done 4 application clinic sessions to help people with their application. We did a recent open house that I just spoke about. We've done radio and TV educational sessions. We've done a number of training sessions with master growers for cultivation. And we did one for processing. We've had investor forums for stakeholders. We've engaged locally, regionally, internationally, including the diaspora. We have completed the development of certification with 2 competency standards for cannabis cultivation via TVET for persons who are interested to be empowered and be certified. I mentioned before that I was going to come back to the National Advisory Committee. So we've set up a National Advisory Committee that is charged with advising and recommending to our board on the future direction of the cannabis industry in 3 main areas. And those areas are, and this is something to empower our local communities and empower our stakeholders. So those 3 things are an assessment of the development of the hemp industry in Barbados, a review of the framework of facilitating small potential local investors and entrepreneurs, and the rollout of a germplasm bank. So those are some things that we're also trying to do moving forward. In addition, and I'll wrap up real soon and get to discussion, is we update our stakeholders with a monthly newsletter on what's happening in the industry every single month. And then there's the open access to anyone who's over 18 to go to our website, which is a hub of information, and our social media platforms. And I cannot forget our concierge desk, because this was set up to ensure that anyone who seeks information or assistance about the industry can speak to a live person, nothing that is automated, a live person to pick up that phone or answer your email. And if she can't help you, she's going to move that query to the right direction. And we have promised to get back to persons in 24 to 48 hours. So we've done all these things in an effort to, focus on how we empower and engage our local communities and our stakeholders, not just educating, but informing them how to participate in the industry, right? And to ensure that, that destigmatization is work that out. So maybe that might not be enough. So let's start off with a brief introduction. gladly, we've had Dr. Mosley introduce himself already. But Douglas, can you please go ahead, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about, you're the king of stakeholder engagement. So give us a little bit about, some of the best practices and introduce yourself for everyone to know who we are talking to. Sure.
Well, thank you for having me on this forum. Douglas Gordon, founder of Canix Jamaica. And I'm also, as was mentioned earlier, the CEO of Silo Wellness, which is a company that operates in the wellness and psychedelic space. So if cannabis wasn't enough in terms of an out there industry, we're talking about psychedelics. By way of background, we started Canix in 2016, and the overarching goal was essentially to create a platform that allowed for people to have idea and knowledge exchange. What we found initially in Jamaica was when they first announced the new regulations and there was stakeholder meetings, you saw a lot of fear, a lot of concern that the foreigners were going to come in and take over the industry, and just, the proverbial little man was not going to be left with an opportunity to participate. And when we saw that, it actually really stirred in me, coming from Trinidad, what happened with the steel pan, and I said, how could we actually do something so that we could play a role in maybe making sure that did not happen? And the most important thing we found was to provide a platform where people could really learn. So cultivators in Jamaica could learn from people in the industry who are operating in different markets, scientists who are local to the Caribbean, they could learn from scientists who are operating in the cannabis industry in other markets, economists, regulators, every single aspect of the stakeholder chain. We wanted to provide a way for them to exchange information. And I think the most important thing that I've come away from that is that you do have to create environments in which people can be heard. There are a lot of misunderstandings, I think, around what it means to be in the ganja industry. And I say that, with all respect, because the truth is, with any business, if you operate at a cottage-esque level, it's a lot different than when it's a commercial scale. And I think having a great understanding of what those differences are what we need in order to build out the kinds of businesses we all want to be a part of, and we want to see the industry flourish. So that's my intro, that's my sort of perspective on it. But I truly encourage as well, if there's one last thing I'd say, is that people go to conferences, get out of your jurisdiction and go. You're looking to spend a lot of money or raise a lot of money or spend a lot of your time. And if we just stay on our respective islands, we're not exposing ourselves to the most advanced techniques, the knowledge base that's out there, and putting ourselves in the game, so to speak, so that we can get those strategic relationships and learn and grow. And I think that's one of the most important things that I've seen us not take full advantage of in the region. And I think it's important that we do, because this industry holds so much promise for the Caribbean, for our people, because we're small populations. The positive impact on GDP per capita is so significant that it's unfortunate that it hasn't yet reached that level where the business community and the government community are truly supportive in understanding the value it potentially brings.
Thank you, Douglas. I'm going to jump back over to Dr. Mosley. You had introduced yourself, but because you're on the ground, I wonder if you can tell us what are sort of the plans that you think that we could implement over the next 2 years to improve and engage more stakeholders? And I would like everyone to think of that question that's in this group. So Angela, I'm going to come to you with that. Emmanuel, I still don't see Omari, but I'm going to come to you with that question. So Dr. Mosley?
Sure. I think, first of all, I think we would need to get more products. We need to get a larger variety of products. I find right now we're limited, in particularly in what we can prescribe to oils, and essentially we need to get things like creams for osteoarthritis, for example, because that is very, very common in an aging population such as ours, and things that to also to address the issues of women's health. That's especially with the aging women, and the fact that I've found that cannabis oil, for example, has helped a lot to alleviate the menopausal symptoms. But also, I'd like to go back to one of the panelists before. and suggest strongly that if we can decriminalize the cannabis plant eventually, that would help to remove a lot of the stigma on a whole. And the fact that once that is removed, we will get more buy-in from patients who are still feeling very guilty about using it, and you'll get more buy-in from the medical fraternity, and you will also get an increase in the amount of good research because you'll get many sources of very good papers.
Thank you, Dr. Mosley. Emmanuel, introduce yourself because I don't think we got an introduction. We got a greetings.
Well, good night again to each and everyone. Allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Emmanuel Barilia. What can I say? Rastafari. I think that's the best place to start because at this point, most things really don't matter. And I must say, if you start wrong, you're going to end wrong. And I've always been of the opinion that because the Rastafari community have been somewhat marginalized in this whole endeavor, and for various reasons, we consume the plant for spiritual reasons. It's not for medicinal, although the plant itself is medicinal. It is holistic. There's so many different components, from fabric to paper. I mean, there's so many things we can get into. But this is about the medicinal aspect of things. My thing is that I think the brother just mentioned it, Mr. Mosley, when it comes to the health aspect, especially for the women, especially also for the elderly in our communities. Yes, there's this negative stigma because of propaganda, and we know where it all originated from. I think at this point, in order for Barbados as a whole, even the region, and I'll deal with the region exclusively because North America and these other countries, the larger countries, they have their own little thing going on. We have sunlight 24/7 down here. Well, maybe not 24/7, but most of the time, almost every season. We don't have no autumn and winter, that kind of stuff. So the Caribbean is the perfect place, like the paradise for this whole thing. And therefore, yes, like the sister said, we should be the ones that benefit from this. Unfortunately, like countries who discover oil, although the brother said, yes, it's good for the Caribbean. And I do agree with Mr. Gordon. The reality, the fact is, like oil, when the country discovers oil, there's only a certain sector of the society who benefits from such. Cannabis probably would be the same thing, unless we start it right. In order to start right, we've got to acknowledge those who have paid the price for decades, who have been saying what we are now saying for decades, what we are now discovering and doing studies and research on. Rastafari community been saying it for like eon, I mean, literally. But the stigma being removed is probably because it is mostly attached to the Rastafari culture. And therefore, then the recreational aspect of it, which I'm not sure what that really is. But the reality is it's a medicinal plant and it has spiritual connotations. It's important to identify those. And therefore, in so doing, then you, like the brother said, you ain't got to worry about people thinking, well, I don't want to smoke marijuana. Well, okay, well, there's different ways to take it. You can have it in your tea. You can make the tea bags and whatnot. You get all kind of industries. The oil, you can have it as a gummy bear, which I think they also do right now. I mean, there's various ways, the elderly. But the main thing now is the pandemic with COVID. And there's lots of research that is coming out that is indicating that, the properties in the cannabis plant does help to inhibit and prevent the whole COVID-19 spread thing. We're not really looking at this really serious. And I'm not putting an indictment on the industry. I'm sure the industry have done all they could do within the means and the time and the resources they had. The reality is, until we get to the point where, like the brother said, we deal with this very holistic and be serious about it. Therefore, like the sister also said, the smaller people or the smaller man could get involved. And the brother said it, Marcus said it, sometimes they don't even have the resources. And by the way, Bayete to the brother from South Africa, and I'm sure South Africa having the same challenges. Yes, a lot of people would love to get into the market, but the reality is the resources are not always there. Yes, we talk about co-ops, have a co-op. Okay, that sounds fair. But even within a co-op, there's the old saying my grandmother would always say, too many cooks spoil the broth. So although we would like the idea of coming together, that may take some other workings on. Not that it's impossible, but logistically speaking, the government, if they're going to spearhead this particular industry, need to include other people who are more perhaps involved in it already and give them the means and the utilities and whatever they need to create it at the level it can be more viable and profitable to all, not just those who can afford a license. Because the guy that has 5 acres versus the guy that might invest in 100, trust me, it's a different reality if it's a money game. So all I want to say towards that, like I said, as a spiritual plant, Rastafari, I mean, if you're going to start right, then you're going to end right. If you started wrong, then it's going to end wrong. And we got to recognize it's a spiritual plant, and it has it. The brother said, he said psychedelic, which is funny, but it has spiritual properties and need to be respected. You know, I yield with that for now.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Amari is here. So Amari, if you can just put your camera on so we can all see you. But Amari and Angela, I really want us to really focus in, and I appreciate what has been said, but I really would like us to really focus in on what you think that we can do to engage more stakeholders, to improve our engagement with stakeholders. I want to just mention to Emmanuel that even before we became the BMCLA, we worked closely with different tribes of the Rastafarian communities. We have reached out to different stakeholder groups to work with them even before. So I just want to mention that so that there is the understanding. 1, we're only a year old. 2, before we started, we really was out there trying as much as we can to reach, but we're a small team and the work continues because we're very serious about it. We had a CEO that was very, very serious about inclusivity. So it was something that was priority and a very serious mandate for us to do. But I want to step back to Amari, and you did tell me you were here. I still don't see you, and Angela. So I'll start with Angela because I can see you. Please introduce yourself and please give me a little bit of what you think we can do to really improve the engagement with our stakeholders.
Certainly, good evening to everyone and all those persons who are taken in. Congratulations on your year. I'm Angela Knight, attorney at law from Barbados. I'm attorney at law for over, I think it's 25 years called to the bar, October last year. I am admitted both in Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago. I've been working within the regulatory framework most of my life as an attorney at law, mostly within government as an attorney at law at various legal posts. Recently, before coming to where I'm based now, the National Insurance Office in Barbados, I was with our Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office, where I would have developed a love for intellectual property. I have been following the journey of the Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Authority, and before that, the general discussion on medicinal cannabis. And I do, we call Douglas Trotman, fellow attorney at law, may he rest in peace, as the others have indicated. Over the last year, I attended many of the things that the Medicinal Cannabis Authority had, and there have been very, very great attempts in terms of looking at the various stakeholders. And I looked at Section 4 of the Medicinal Cannabis Industry Act, number 14 of 2019. And out of there, I can say, having looked at the different words, looking at their mandate, I found some keywords. And out of those keywords, I would mention them. I can say that it is, in my opinion, humble opinion, that the Medicinal Cannabis Authority of Barbados has attempted and has done well over the last years. I see such words in Section 4, subsection 1, and Section 4, subsection 2 of the legislation that speak to develop, regulate, issue, enforce, establish, maintain, enter into agreements, collate, collect, ensure, formulate, facilitate. So it was a big and wide mandate that Section 4.1 and 4.2 has given the Medicinal Cannabis Authority. And therefore the stakeholders that I've observed have been a wide range of stakeholders. Now I was asked to speak to what I think that they can do more in terms of engaging in the future, recognizing that obviously stakeholder engagement would change in terms of depth, breadth, as the organization goes on. During the first year, it was involved with the building out of an industry, a completely new industry. As we go on now and people get their investors and licensees and applicants get their application going, I guess the nature of the engagement will be different and will shift a little bit, although you will still have those stakeholders, broadly speaking. And I had put the stakeholders into 3 sets of stakeholders. So I can see them going forward, obviously having to engage more the persons who now would have gotten license, security, manufacturers, customs, import and export challenges. The other components now, as we try to make the industry efficient, try to make the industry work and everything. And obviously, we haven't got into banking or anything, but those issues, I would see them having to engage in those persons. For me, in terms of finishing off on this point, I would like more, and I go back to Emmanuel's point, more engagement, and I'm not going to go and say the same thing, more engagement with the Rastafarian community, the traditional cultivator, or you call it the persons, the TC, the legacy growers, as it relates to helping them in research and development, understanding intellectual property, and where they fit within the scheme of things, helping them to step up more in various ways. And I won't repeat what Emmanuel said, but as it relates to intellectual property, I would like them to be able to get into patents, trademarks, traditional knowledge and know-how, those areas of intellectual property that would give them that financial step up that they really need, you know, because they've been in the industry for very many years. Final point to say, in looking at the Sacramento Cannabis Act and compared with medicinal cannabis, I do agree that we are really splitting hairs in defining a cannabis out of a medicinal cannabis, out of all of this thing. We're really splitting hairs. That's my take.
Thank you very much. I still do not see Omari, and he says he's here. I am at an absolute loss of where he is.
If I may, while Omari finds his mic button, first I really want to say thanks to Sister for the, the word sound and power, because, and I do know the industry is only a year, and it's more like, full respect. The reality is, once we are serious, it's going to work. Once we are serious, it's going to work. If we're just going through the motions, just to say we had a talk shop, this is 2022. Everything is changing. The world is changing. COVID, new variants. I mean, nothing is the same as it was. So this is an opportunity for the region, like the sister said, and the legislation, all that stuff. I mean, that's really the problem, It's just way too much talk. I mean, Rasta been growing marijuana forever. I mean, we don't need no legislation to do that. We don't do it. The reality, the fact is, there may be a scientific aspect of it that needs to be taught. And I totally agree with that. And I think that once we stop all the red tape and get down to what they call the brass tacks, or just hit the ground running. Let us hit the ground running. Let's sincerely put things in motion and not just talk about putting things in motion to make it happen. I am aware of my last point before I go about the connection with the Rastafarian connection thing. Yeah, I am familiar with that. And the reality is that never got off the ground. And again, like a plane who's going somewhere, yes, it has to taxi, but they also have to lift off. In order to lift off, they need a few things. Fuel is one in the plane. That's pretty good. A good pilot is also another good thing, and a good crew. So with that, I just see you. I see Marcus in the building, and that's my 2 cents, man.
Right. Thank you so very much. Marcus, you wanted to comment before I go to Kevin and Prince. Go ahead,
just very quickly, I just want to clarify a point that Brother Emmanuel and Dr. Mosley made earlier, which is I don't want your viewers to get the idea that Barbados has not decriminalized yet. What has happened is that in 2021, Barbados did decriminalize 14 grams or less
yes.
possession to a finable offense of $200 Barbadian. Right? Keep in mind, Trinidad, I believe Trinidad and Antigua are the only countries in the region that have legalized the possession of a certain amount. And Antigua is a kind of gray area because they did specify a violation penalty, but they didn't specify the penalty. Jamaica is a $5, I believe, penalty if you are caught with 56 grams or less. So Jamaica is not legal like that 30 grams with no penalty. There's still a penalty. So Barbados did decriminalize. You can possess it. You cannot cultivate it yet. And for Brother Berelia, the Sacramental Act of 2019 was created to the Medicinal Cannabis Industry Act in Barbados, but it was actually passed into law before the Medical Industry Act. And that allows persons of the Rastafarian religion through a registered place of worship to apply to the General's office, not the BMCLA, but through the Attorney General's office for permission to cultivate, to dispense, not sell, but dispense through a registered environment and so forth. And that's a huge law with a lot of loopholes. But the availability to have the authority, the authorized permission to engage in cultivation and dispensation to persons who are part of that registered organization is available in Barbados. And that's a very important thing. Another part is the expungement. You did mention, Brother Berelia, earlier about we should look at persons with records. Well, automatically, unlike Trinidad, where you have to go to the court and pull documents and all that, automatically in Barbados, anyone that has had a record for the possession of cannabis of under 14 grams was now completely expunged. So if you've had a record for less than 14 grams possession of cannabis, you no longer have that record in Barbados. And those were big moves by the Barbados government in terms of decriminalization. Yes, there's a lot more to do and to go, but it takes time. Those already moves. In terms of melding religious use with medical, it's a little bit tough because, as we were speaking about in the other session, abiding by that international law obligation, it's not a guideline, it's a law obligation. We've signed on to abide by international law. Until that changes, a country like, especially a developing country, has to abide by those laws, because non-compliance can affect us when we seek to borrow money from the IMF, let's say, right? And you know, Barbados is a country well wicked.
But Mr. Ramkisoon, one problem with that though is that it's only up to a certain amount. I'm dealing with patients who are still reading and they're still aware that it's still illegal above a certain amount. So we're actually asking for complete decriminalization so that the stigma is removed.
Complete decriminalization would mean not putting an amount, and that is, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, in my professional opinion, never going to happen as long as cannabis remains a scheduled drug internationally.
Unfortunately, as in my profession, I'm going to be dealing with patients who are terrified, particularly the middle-aged and older patients, where there will be some good in getting either cream, an edible, or even the drops under the tongue, and they refuse, and they've been on several other dangerous medications, because I'm the doctor that deals with morphine, I'm the doctor that deals with Panadol and non-steroidals. And these drugs have been shown to have a therapeutic index, or for those people who are listening, to be unsafe compared to the use of cannabis. Okay, cannabis is a very safe drug. And I think, unfortunately, if we don't do something about the stigma, we run the risk of trying to build a house with a hammer without the nails.
Okay, so
guys, I'm sorry. I just need to pause. We do not have a lot of time, but for those who haven't been able to add their voices, please do. Douglas, I think you wanted to.
Yeah, I was just saying really 2 quick points. I mean, this comes back to what we've seen through the platform of Canix that I think is a massive deficiency, right? So when we talk about the traditional community, the Rastafarian community becoming involved, a big piece that I think you could look at that is missing is when you have business promotion agencies, and they have an incubator is what's primarily missing for the Rastafarian and traditional farming community to get involved in the industry, a proper incubator, because there's no business in a regulated industry that can survive and thrive just based on someone's passion or expertise in growing the plant. It goes way beyond that. It's leases, it's hiring, it's compliance, yada, 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 okay? The second thing that has not been properly addressed here in Jamaica, and it's again, when we talk about how stakeholders can move the needle and what governments can do to facilitate same, is a comprehensive communication strategy. Because until you make the population understand the benefits, not so much how did we land here, that's spending a lot of time and resource to try to correct a wrong that doesn't make someone see this as a benefit. But a communication strategy that starts to speak primarily to the older community. And I start there because they have the most hardened stigmas, but also they are actually at a place, Doctor, and I've seen this, where they get to a point where they're more willing to try something because nothing's working. And so when we communicate to them about the safety profile, the efficacy of cannabis then I think you start to create an environment where an industry can take off. Absent those two things, supporting the traditional community in terms of how to build a business in a regulated environment, and educating the market in terms of what this opportunity truly represents, you're spinning your wheels in the mud, whether it's deregulated, whether it's expunged. All of these different components are important. But without those two things, in my humble opinion, nothing else really is going to gather the kind of steam that will allow this to become the thriving industry that I think it can be for Caribbean people.
Thank you so much, Douglas. Thank you so much. Amari is here. Amari, you have a couple minutes to introduce yourself. Please turn on your camera and talk to us a little bit about, we're talking about the stakeholder engagement, and we're looking at ways that we can improve and engage more stakeholders. Did he just disappear again?
Elvis has exited the building.
Wi-Fi, it looks like the Wi-Fi might be not.
Well, we only have there he is.
And I will, if I may, I will say, Douglas, I respect everything that you've done and continue to do. And I really don't want you to think that I'm stepping on your toes if I'm saying that we need to have a second event in Jamaica. We need to have numerous events in Jamaica, and that's what I'm trying to do. So from that point of view, I respect you enormously for what you have done. Just accept that there are other avenues that we can, and we will. You know,
sorry,
I have been missed in this conversation.
The audio might be better.
What my hope, sorry?
Omari, you're breaking up really badly. Yeah.
Okay.
But you also didn't introduce yourself for others to know who you are. So if you could just quickly introduce yourself, please.
I'm the black spot in the you know, we can see my face. Unfortunately, I don't have the right lighting. I'm a media person who is just trying to, as far as my objective is to keep Jamaica, well, primarily Jamaica, as well as the Caribbean, as a part of the global ganja or cannabis conversation. And I honestly don't. I think that we can do that once per year. Sorry, Douglas. I respect you. We'll do that. You send support for what you do, but I'm thinking 2 events per year. That could work. Anyways, beyond, great to be here amongst you people. My lighting is not good enough so you can see my face.
It's okay.
So I'm
it's
just
all right.
like a black spot.
We can see you. We can see you.
But please, I'm carrying on with your conversation. I'm in full support across the Caribbean region, but I'm based now in Jamaica. Anyway, sorry. What was the conversation? Let me jump back in. Yeah, okay.
Sorry, Amari. Let me just move quickly to St. Vincent. Kevin, do you have anything to add? Because we really have to wrap up this session. So I really would like to get insight from yourself and Prince Tulani.
Okay, I don't have much to add, but what we do here in St. Vincent is that the traditional growers, these 2 groups from the traditional growers, they attach themselves to an investor group. So we walk along with them, and we also buy a percentage. If we have to export or if we have to dispensary, we have to buy a percentage from them. So I just want to throw that out and say that is a way that the traditional farmers can intervene.
Let me explain. Let me understand that. So your farmers are growing, and they're commissioned to produce a certain amount for an entity, or you're just trying to make. Sorry, again, because that's what's happening throughout the entire industry. There are people who are willing to grow. There are people who aren't really ready yet, but we want to bring them into the whole system. So what are you doing? again, it's not the easiest.
Well,
not
I'm
to
speaking.
say, oh, you can grow bread about. It's not gonna happen, you know.
Well, I'm speaking from an investor point of view. You maybe want to know from the authority what they're doing, but I only can speak for you from.
Well, no, I know, because I want to know what people can invest in. That's what I'm trying to set up entities people can invest in, so that would make sense.
I'm so sorry,
It would
Amari.
make sense for people.
I got to interrupt because we are going over time. What I would suggest, though, is that we are going to have everyone's information up, and maybe Amari, you can reach out to Kevin and get some more information about what's happening in St. Vincent, because I really would like Prince Tulani to get a voice in before we move over to banking and spending in the cannabis industry.
I got you. I was just trying to throw out some ideas. All right, let's do it. Yeah.
Hey, thank you. From the thank you. From the stakeholder engagement in South Africa, we had a CannaCheck conference, which encouraged more stakeholders to meet in the conference to participate with their cannabis expo, which are happening annually, which they aim to promote the cannabis community and the hemp community. Also, one of the other things that the government must see that the stakeholder engagement will bring positive result to increase the economy. The workshops are very important, the conferences, the seminar, people must be educated, and there must be a community approach towards stakeholder engagement to make sure that when you build this industry, you are inclusive, you are also inclusive, including the people. Every citizen must be involved. We must take note of the word of every citizen and make sure that this industry is developed in a way that it will boost the economy of the country and boost the life of the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry that we have to move on to the next session.
Can I add? All right.
Sorry, Amari, we do really have to.
I wanted to address that comment, but that's fine.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's all good, man. Come on, I'm on your side. It's good.
Okay, so we're going to move over to the third session, which is banking and spending in the cannabis industry. There was no questions in the audience towards the session just now, so I'm going to introduce the panel, and then I'm going to hand over to Sarah. The reason I'm pausing is that I'm not seeing the folks from Denton.
This is Eric. So,
hi, Eric. There you go. So Eric is here.
I think the problem is because I was at the bottom
and there
of the
you
screen,
are, Robert. Awesome.
And hopefully others are here, but I'll say I have a lot to say, so I'll.
you're gonna have to keep it succinct, Eric. You gotta keep it succinct. So we have Eric Berlin here from Denton's. We have Robert Simmons from Denton's, and we also have who am I missing?
Michael Patterson.
Michael Patterson.
Michael, there you are.
Here I am.
Michael.
How could they forget about you, Michael? Come on.
And Michael Patterson. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah to moderate this session.
Great. Just to answer, somebody did just kind of post something up in the chat before we left, asking why people keep on referring to legacy farmer. So there are different things in different jurisdictions. Some people call them traditional farmers. Some people call them legacy. It's a word really that we've all kind of embraced as to get away from the term black market, right? We don't want to talk about black market growers. We want to give a little bit of respect to the legacy growers. So just to clear that up, and then we'll jump into banking. So banking this is our big problem. It is the problem of everybody in this industry, every single country that is on this call right now. We're all facing the same problem with banking in the cannabis industry. I'm a consultant. I've been a consultant for 7 years. My bank account says consultant, and my bank account got shut down. And that's the Bank of Montreal in Canada, which was the only bank that was actually supporting the cannabis community, and one of the only banks that we could actually set up cannabis accounts for. But I'm a consultant. I touch the plant if I go to my clients' sites, but I don't actually grow anything. And even from trying to get paid from clients outside of Canada, the rigmarole is crazy, whether it's Barbados or St. Vincent. So I know that this is a really big issue. So why don't we start with, maybe we could start off with Robert, because you're our Bajan guy, to talk about what the landscape kind of looks like in Barbados right now, and like what do we need to do to move this along, so that as these licenses are getting issued, people need to open up bank accounts to be able to actually open their businesses, right?
Certainly. Good night, and thank you for an invitation. And I want to say a happy anniversary to the BMCLA as well. Doing a very good job, and I certainly think that you've kind of set the foundation that needs to be set for which is what I'll get into now, which is the banking sector. But firstly, before I go in, I am the Global Services Manager for Denton's. I cover around 13 jurisdictions in the Caribbean, from Jamaica up in the north all the way down to Guyana in the south. So seeing banking from a number of different perspectives is something that I've dealt with over the last couple of years now, going into 9 years now. Firstly, I like to say that the banking situation is not isolated to Barbados. It does cover a lot of these jurisdictions. Actually, it's a global issue. And secondly, I think what's critically important, that is not isolated to this regulatory regime either. There are a number of other emerging markets and regulatory markets that are even probably more regulated than the kind of medicinal cannabis market, that are having the same issues. When you kind of boil it all down, what you're looking at is a corresponding banking issue, essentially, to some degree. Notwithstanding that you may have a European investor who wants to invest in Barbados, he's likely to be coming with US dollars. And that's then going to be the issue. Same thing for Canadian investors. A lot of them have US dollars, and that's going to be the issue for them as well. Looking at a Eastern Caribbean Central Bank report just end of last year, around 32% of the corresponding bank relationships are with US banks. That's a huge number, right? And when you consider the restriction that we have there, that certainly is going to be a huge issue for the banking landscape across the board. And again, going back to the point about corresponding banks, again, it's not isolated to the medicinal cannabis regime. Back in 2015, going into 2018, I think around 15 banks lost tons of corresponding banking relationships because of the international business sector, which really there wasn't any per se nefarious activities that one could earmark and say this was the reason. There was a number of de-risking issues that basically caused that. And when you kind of move from a Schedule 1 drug, and then you have medicinal regulation, that isn't going to cure it overnight. Certainly not. And then I think what my colleagues, both Michael and Eric, will touch on relates to the elephant in the room, which is the US banking regulations in the sector, which is indeed the core issue that we'll have and face for quite some time in the Caribbean.
That's great, Robert. Thank you so much. So why don't we move to the US platform? Omari, I see that you're trying to talk.
Yeah.
Hold on 1 second. We'll actually get a chance to talk at the end. Okay, so we only have 3 panelists on this, and then we're going to invite other people if you have other contributions and stuff. So not trying to steal your voice, just trying to respect the panelists. So Eric, if we could go across to you, you said you have a lot to say. Maybe talk to us a little bit about the banking.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And thank you very much for having me, Sarah, and to everyone else. I'm honored to be here with these other amazing panelists, really from around the world. Just by point of background, I lead the US and global cannabis sector group at Denton's, which is the largest firm in the world and obviously has a strong Caribbean presence. I've been involved in the cannabis industry now for over 13 years. I was a lawyer who helped draft and get past the Illinois medical cannabis law, the Ohio medical cannabis law, and then moving on to adult use, and I'm involved on the federal side as well. The banking is going to take time, and that really is probably the theme that we heard today, right? I mean, this is everyone who spoke is absolutely correct. You're correct, Sarah. This is a global challenge. David Hyde is absolutely correct. This is being overregulated and overtaxed, which is an enormous problem. When I started here in the United States 13 years ago, there was no legalized cannabis. And when I started working on it, people told me I was out of my head for doing it. Now, I could, this is relevant to the banking discussion, I could walk the 1,000 meters to my local dispensary. I can purchase basically any product that you can imagine. Any way you can get cannabis into the body, I can purchase state legally at that dispensary. And I can use my debit card through a cashless ATM to make that transaction. And I think it's important to know that
you also do so at Walmart and other CVS. I just want to throw that in there, just because you're saying.
He broke up, but we can't do that yet at Walmart. I can walk across the street to the Target and make that purchase, but not of cannabis yet. But anyway, those are all things that are occurring in the United States. We have in the United States a state legal, state regulated, and state taxed cannabis industry that had over $20 billion of sales last year. This coming year, it'll be about 4 times the size of the Barbados GDP. What's holding up the entire activity here is the Schedule I status in the United States and its implications through the Controlled Substances Act and through our money laundering laws and through banks being risk adverse coming out of the recession. And so just to answer the question, Sarah, as to where we are, it's a really interesting place because we have such a large industry here that is not really federally threatened, yet the federal status is holding up the rest of the world. It's a bizarre sort of modern kind of colonialism that I certainly don't abide by. And so we're looking at change. Full legalization is not likely to happen before our midterm elections that are coming up. The most important bill with respect to banking and finance is the Safe Banking Act, which has the support. But is,
can I throw in?
Yeah, sorry guys, the people keep on going on and off of mute. I think it's just technical difficulties.
Sorry, I just want to add as well, please. Please just be respectful of people's time. Please just let a person finish their point. You'll have your chance to ask your question. So please be respectful of people's time. Stay on mute until the person is finished what they're saying. Please and thank you. Continue.
No, that's okay,
Eric.
Sarah. I'm going to hand it back to you. That was a little choppy, but I think I got a few points out, and we can go from there.
You did. Thank you very much for that. So let's go across to Michael, and then we can let some of the other panelists just jump in on their questions, because I know, Michael, you have a lot to say on this subject as well, and some pretty inventive solutions that have kind of come across your plate for different ways to navigate around the banking issue that we're all facing.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me on. I'm glad to be on. I know I met a lot of you guys when I was in Barbados, so if you can tell, I'm from the southern United States, so we talk a little bit different. And so I love your accent. I've been told people like my accent. It's a win-win. So we all get to have fun, listen to each other. So my whole thing is I've been in this business now for about 9 years. My background's healthcare. I'm a licensed nursing home administrator and occupational therapist. I've run companies in the size of $230 million a year in healthcare. We currently, in cannabis-wise, we actually export from Lesotho. I'm currently working with 5 organizations in South Africa to ship from South Africa into Europe as well as Australia. We've already shipped out of Lesotho to Australia as well as Europe. So we're very versed in international trade. We're currently working on a deal that's going to be a vaccine deal through a government in Africa, as well as a government in Europe, which will be hopefully announced very soon. We'll be up to 1 billion doses of COVID vaccine. And the goal is to start R&D in those countries, as well as provide production for the base material for more research around the world and for the pharmaceutical industry. In regards to the United States, we have done a lot of work in the cannabis industry through consulting, as well as into digital payments. So in regards to banking in the United States, everything works off a memo from 2014 called the FinCEN memo, which is a Federal Crimes Enforcement Network. And so basically the US government said, if you're going to deal with this with banking, you have to make sure there's no guns involved. You're not distributing cannabis to minors. You have to have some sort of tracking and tracing system. And you have to abide by banking rules, which is AML, anti-money laundering, and KYC, know your customer. So what banks have done here in the United States is they followed those rules. I've worked directly with the first banks ever to do this. And when there was a memo that came out where they rescinded another memo, and the bankers freaked out, and they literally had to take $225 million in cash and give it back to each customer who was a marijuana operator. So they had to hire a money truck to bring it around. And so we don't have it all together here either. Now, moving forward, I'm hoping this will be addressed in the 2022 session, just specifically with banking. I don't think it's going to be legalization or anything, but there's too much money on the table. But one of the things that I've been working with in our group is we actually work for over 25 years. The group I'm working with out of Oklahoma, they have developed a lawful digital token in the United States, and it hasn't really gone public yet because we've been working on the legal structure. And the way this works is just going to be equal to, say, a digital dollar. It will be backed by a reserve, and where it's just imagine of wiring $1 US to Barbados. It's the same exact thing, but you can do it through your app. So currently it's in testing, and we've already gone through 2.5 years with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We're getting ready to release this into the state of Oklahoma medical cannabis industry in the next few months. And then the goal is to perfect the system and make sure it works with banks, because we feel this will be ideal for the Caribbean, ideal for all the nations to send money back and forth, because the way it will work is it's literally sending it on your app, and then it can go into the banking system, and we'll have all the track and trace information attached to the blockchain. So it's very exciting, and a lot of things are coming, and that's one of the things that my company is working on, is to fix these choke points in the system. And another thing I'd like to address with all the Caribbean nations is you're more powerful together. To me, I'm agreeing with Harley talking about that you have to join forces, because if cannabis is too complicated and there's too many rules, we're seeing it here in the States. People stay away from complicated states or bad regulatory regimes. For example, Oklahoma, there's no limit on licensing. There's 11,000 licensed businesses here. Okay, Florida, there's 22 million people. We have 22 licensed businesses. So who do you think has crime problems? It's not Florida. It's Oklahoma, because the system wasn't set up. And also in Florida, we're talking about changing the way of thinking on cannabis. Florida now is the largest medical cannabis market in the world. We have over 670,000 medical cannabis patients, which I am one of them. And now you can go into any store and use your debit card. You can't use your credit card, and you can buy product through cash or debit. To do that, we're seeing more banks here start coming on, and so we expect that to continue. But we are all pushing to change the banking in the States so we can all open this up globally.
Awesome.
That's fantastic. So I want to change track just slightly on this conversation, and just because Dr. Mosley, is Dr. Mosley still on? Yes, Dr. Mosley.
Yes, he is.
Just because Dr. Mosley is still on, because we're talking about Barbados and we're talking about a medical platform there. Dr. Mosley, I know that we're having challenges for patients right now who they're going through the process to be able to import, but they're having problems actually paying for it. Can you shed any light on that? I hope he's still on.
He is. Dr. Mosley?
No, if not, then Robert, you might be able to shed.
My apologies, I stepped away.
Oh, there we go.
I stepped away a bit. Yes, sorry, what was the question?
Sorry, I was just saying that from so we're talking about banking, and I know that one of the problems that the patients are having in Barbados right now is when they're going through the process for importation, and they're going through the regulatory to be able to bring in their medicine while they're still setting up the framework. There's a problem with banking. There's a problem with actually buying it. Have you heard of any solutions to that, or any particular troubles that that the patients are having?
Well, I can definitely give you essentially what the patients are advised to do right now, which is that they can get a doctor's letter, take it to the Barbados Drug Council, and as a result of that, you get permission from the chairman of that, and you can bring it in through customs. Because once again, thanks to that law that Douglas Trotman did find, you are allowed to have cannabis as long as it has been prescribed by a physician. Okay, so it's not as difficult as that. I think a lot of procedure has been done to cut it down and make it simple. And I honestly cannot think of anything simple to do, because you want to get rid of the people who are just taking it out of curiosity and they're not really ill and need it. And you also want to make sure that people are serious and they don't waste it either. Okay. So I think that has been put into place. Yes.
Okay. No, that's great. So I know, Angela, did you want to ask that question directly? Because I don't think that the audience would be able to see the chat that we have on the panelist side.
Certainly. Good night again, Michael Patterson. Thanks for your presentation. In Barbados now, and at the credit union, at the bank, we fill out forms here where we declare our source of funds. You mentioned what you're working on over there in the USA, and it sounds very, very good in terms of the use of the app. But do you have to declare your source of funds, or you don't have to declare your source of funds?
So if you're just going to go buy it as a patient, you don't have to declare. All you have to do is declare that you are you, and that's through the ID. So they make you go through that system. Other than that, you can pay with cash. Most people pay with cash still. So, but you don't have to tell where you got it. Now, when you apply to be an operator, you have to go through use of funds and a criminal background check, and it's usually federal and state. But you, as a customer, no, you can just go buy it anywhere. Because remember, we're almost 20 states in as recreational here. So it's a real big mess, but there's no way to track that. So no, they don't.
Okay. One last question quickly though, Sarah. So you still then have the challenge then, if you were into manufacturing, processing, actually within the industry working, then you would still have the challenge with banking then?
Well, we do have banks. So I work with companies who, there's about 400 banks here in the United States that actually take cannabis dollars. They don't want to advertise it. So it's kind of hard to find out who it is. But now what we're seeing specifically in Florida, there's a couple banks that are advertising it, that they do this. And just for the pleasure of having a bank account, they charge up to $5,000 a month of a fee just to have an account. Now, a lot of that is because of the paperwork trail, the digital trail they have to follow, because they're liable and they can be shut down. There was a bank, I think, Eric, up in Illinois that was shut down because they were doing some nefarious things, or they wasn't tracking right. Because if you're a bank, you have to, and I want Eric to follow this. If you're a bank, you have to show that you know what you're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, then you can be liable. Please take that one, Eric.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. It refers to what you mentioned earlier, the FinCEN guidelines. And so the federal government here is principally concerned with the concealment of funds. They understand there is a lot of cannabis money going through the system, and they're not choosing to do anything about that. They are concerned where there is concealment of funds, and certainly concealment of funds going internationally. So what our government has asked the banks, the financial institutions that are serving the cannabis industry, is to do detailed due diligence on the customer. They, Michael referred to a KYC, and it's detailed. It's quite detailed as to what they need to look at to make sure that the company is in compliance with state law and maintaining compliance with state law. The bank also needs to file suspicious activity reports. even if that underlying business is 100% legal, everything is going fine, the mere fact that it involves cannabis, the bank has to file that suspicious activity report. If they are banking cannabis and not doing those things, they can get in a lot of trouble. Right. If they are banking cannabis and following those, they are likely not to get in any trouble at all. Right. Now, most banks choose not to do that for all sorts of reasons that I could detail. But the bottom line is there still are many banks who are willing to at least handle deposits from the industry. And I'll say that the availability, beyond that, the availability of, for example, debt financing into the industry has increased exponentially. And I anticipate that that will happen globally as well. And there's specific reasons why that has changed over the last 2 years.
Can I ask a question? Robert, I just wonder if you can bring it back to localize it. With everything Michael and Eric has shared, where do we fit in?
That's a good question. And I'm glad that we did have Michael and Eric here, because I think this is where we're going to try to have to use some of the solutions that have been used there and try to implement here in Barbados, right? And I'll kind of give you 4 probably tried solutions in order of preference, I would say, or what is quickest right now. Firstly is, we can always go on the route of cashless ATM, similar to what Michael referenced, but that works until your industry becomes too big, where it then becomes a public, a public health issue to some degree. We have people walk around with loads of cash, and then it just becomes a major issue. I mean, the next thing you could do certainly is to lobby the banks to kind of ring fence their banking system to take on Canadian dollars and euros, similar to what has been done by the Bank of St. Vincent and Grenadines quite successfully. I think I was just reading Reuters 7 days ago, they had their first shipment to Germany, I believe. And that was done because of having a very strong banking system now where euros can be used quite significantly, quite easily. I should touch on this, and this is probably another elephant in the room for bigger policy, but certainly a national bank. And I think that Bank of St. Vincent and Grenadines achievement would not have been done without a national bank. Because this is where you can, instead of lobbying commercial banks, you can actually push local policy to your banking institution. And it's much easier to do it if you're a local banking institution than the commercial bank. So that certainly is one of the key things. And I think definitely a national bank with a number of emerging markets that we're trying to get into, that certainly is a key here from a long-term perspective. And then obviously the last component, which it has its downfalls, would be the cryptocurrency point. I say downfalls not necessarily from the actual technological aspect of it, because I think that's the future, but certainly with the kind of demographic we have in Barbados, is something that not all persons or service providers or persons who are in industry will be able to use on a day-to-day. So that will be definitely one of the issues. From a practical perspective, to some degree, it will be beneficial. But when you're talking about, people who, security companies, for instance, which is a large vendor in this industry, they will not be able to access current cryptocurrency. I can tell you that for sure. So it has its downfalls, but certainly it is something that that could work. So I would say those 4 major things would be if we could fit all of them in, it could, insulate. I can tell you for sure, I just came back from the MJ BizCom conference in Las Vegas a few weeks ago, and looking at how, the financial sector is there, it's indeed in a bubble, but when it has these 4 major components, it works, right? So certainly if we did apply them to a Barbados industry, it could work for quite a while. And certainly it would definitely hold us out until the US market figures out what it's going to do on a federal level.
It's really interesting. So Kevin and Prince Tilani, I know we're kind of like ending, getting to the end of it now, but we have a couple minutes left and really want to make sure that we're hearing your voices. Any perspective, especially since Vincent is being talked about so much in this, kind of any perspective from both of your countries? Maybe Kevin, if you want to go first. Oh, so sorry.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Sarah. From the banking side, I think what will resolve the banking issue is that we need to see a lot of businesses coming in the industry so that there can be economy, so that the government can see, or the banking can see, that this industry, it has a potential to change people's lives. Then policies will be able to be changed. So there must be a growth in the production of producing hemp or medicinal cannabis, so that the industry can be very established in a successful way. So that's how I think we can overcome the challenge of the banking, because of now, if the industry is not fully legalized or welcome, the banks systems are afraid of accepting the money. They think is money which is illegal. So we have to grow a lot of businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Prince Tilani. Kevin?
Okay. As Simmons would have spoken before, St. Vincent Bank would have been one of the first in the region to basically accepting companies like myself to start hooking up a bank account. So that's a big step in the process, because when you look at, you have workers to pay, and you can't get funds coming in terms of investors. It's a very, very sad situation. Sometimes you have to wait months, and you get to lose employees, good employees that way. So I know for sure this is a very good step in the process. So that's all.
Sarah, if I could add to that, Kevin, and what we're seeing here is the bank. I was able to speak in 2019 at the first ever cannabis banking summit. It was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There was 170 banks there, and I'm just going to be blunt. They didn't know anything about cannabis at all. Okay. So a lot of the problems that we're seeing in the market is across the board. It's education. I got up there. So my role was to basically break down what this industry is and how it works. And all these bankers, they don't know that. And I don't know banking. You know, I'm not a banker. So what I'm saying is that I think from a governmental perspective, the education is critical. Another issue in Colorado, when they started in regular legalization, they had no dosing limits. So people would go get a cannabis cookie and it could have 1,000 milligrams of THC. Well, they had a lot of overdoses. Wow, we didn't have standards, and they didn't educate the public. So I see a huge problem, because if you're not comfortable with something, specifically in banking, and we all know bankers are extremely conservative, then they're never going to do it. So we have to make them more comfortable. And a lot of what I do through my entire business is preach trust. You have to have trust in the system, because nobody trusts cannabis. And if you can sell trust through your system, then you will succeed. And some of the things I see from the Caribbean nations is joining together specifically on banking, and work through your legislators and your consulates in the United States and join forces. I was able to speak to the consulate in Toronto when I was up there. By the way, I brought cannabis across the border, and the border agents asked me about it. And I'm thinking, isn't it legal here? And they're like, oh yeah, it's okay. I said, okay, because I'm a medical cannabis patient. So I went across international borders. But I was able to get a meeting with the South African consulate because they were very interested. I wanted to talk to them about export of cannabis from South Africa. So I see the same component in the United States, working through your governments. You have a lot of power, and I want to help you use that power, because this pushes everybody else, because nobody's talking about the international component of cannabis. And I'm pushing in the United States how this is going to benefit us financially. It's going to benefit the right all the wrongs of all the social justice issues that we have a ton of. So there's a lot of things to where I just recommend that use your power in your governments to push the United States government, because if you join forces on that side, we can help on the other side. And right now we're at a tipping point, I feel, to where maybe we can get some banking regulations through.
One of the things, just before I go, I've seen to not only in the banking, but it's in the softwares that we use throughout. My company would have used various different software before we could pinpoint one that would be widely used. So it's not only in the banking, but even the software system, one that is acceptable in the Caribbean and throughout the region. So just like
Good point.
Good
point.
Kevin, to be clear, you're talking about banking software?
No, well,
No.
even the software in track and tracing and everything.
Okay, got it, got it.
You know, and I know you would have said also let our government push, but as somebody would have stated earlier, this has to become through CARICOM. Something like this. Other than that, I don't think that we here alone can do it.
And I agree with you. So what I'm saying is I see your power from the other side, because I'm just saying to bring it up to where it's something to where it's just a thought. You know, I don't know the connections through the governments of my government, y'all's government, but what I'm saying is they're willing to have a conversation, and they need another way to benefit the American public. And I keep pushing about exports from America and also imports into America, because we are going, in my opinion, you guys are taking the right road with R&D, because exactly, you don't have a lot of land, you've got a lot of smart people there, and you can do a lot of great R&D that you can use your IP into the States, because the States, 90% of all legal sales of cannabis are in America, and it's illegal, and it makes no sense. So to me, the Caribbean nations are going to be great for tourism, as medical tourism is going to be huge, as well as R&D, because then you can bring that R&D globally, because we see Europe is going to be massive as well. So I think you're absolutely right. I just want to try to assist the Caribbean nations as best we can to make sure we all can benefit from this change of law.
Annette, you wanted to add something?
Yes, just to add. Thank you very much. In relation, based on the discussions with the banking, I can say in Jamaica, the banks have taken steps to understand the cannabis industry, but there are some realities. There are some realities when it comes on to the correspondent banking the correspondent banking, because there are different pressures and requirements from them. So I agree with my friend, and that is why I said it earlier, and I'm glad the panelists are agreeing with me. We will have to take a regional approach in relation to some of the hindrances and the obstacles that we are experiencing. And I agree with you that we will have to, our government will have to engage the different arms in the United States. So from your side, for those who lobby and provide consultancy in the US, I can tell you that the Caribbean advocates and leaders and different persons aligned with us, they're doing their part. So what we would love for you all to do, to see what part you can play in the US and elsewhere. But in Jamaica, I must say, to a large extent, the banks are trying their very best to understand the industry. And just as my friend in St. Vincent and the Grenadines said, they will have you make presentations to them. They will be satisfied that there's no inversion from the illegal market and diversion from the licit to the illicit. They may be confident there, but there are some realities that the banks have to deal with. And lastly, I say, while the banks are dealing with that, there's still some stereotype because of the antecedent of the industry, the social impairments and the legal impairments. And that is why I end by saying, I hope that this dialogue will continue and we deepen the regional collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you so very much. There are some quiet folks. Before we wrap up, I wanted to know if anyone wanted to add to the banking and spending conversation very briefly, because we have to wrap up. Angela?
Oh, sorry, just very briefly. And I think for Barbados, chances are we will have to look in terms of concerns pertaining to anti-money laundering, counter financing and terrorism. Because recently, the last couple of years, a few years ago, there was that concern in terms of sources of funding as well. So we would want to make sure that in terms of stakeholder engagement as well going forward, that your investors, in terms of checking them and everything in the background checks, to make sure that money is not coming into the island from sources that would be flagged as, against our laws. So that was just my final, my add-on.
Thank you so much, Angela. Before we wrap, oh, sorry.
Yes, all right.
Go ahead, Emmanuel.
Yeah, well, sat patiently here, listening attentively. And again, I just want to reiterate two things. If we start wrong, we're going to end wrong. Eric, I want to definitely salute you for having the fortitude to speak truth to power. And the reality is it's a colonial thing. America is not going to yield to the Caribbean at all. That's not how that's going to happen. I think Michael made it very clear that they're looking at alternate ways to see what we can do in the interim, but I'm sure that will be the long-term plan, because the reality is they're not going to do that. That's why Eric said, right now in America, things are running, you know, it's not perfect, but there's motion. And yet here we're in the Caribbean stuck in mud. Makes absolutely no sense. So the reality, the fact is that, and I think, Angela, I think the sister said it again, collectively working, Kevin mentioned it too, carry calm. That's wishful thinking, but that's a whole other conversation. The point is, when we get serious about it, the brother Marcus talked about Rastafari and the different rules, and it was decriminalized. What does that mean then? It decriminalized. If you get catch with it, I still fine you. If you can't pay the fine, and put you in prison. Like, I mean, you'd have to be left thinking to not recognize that's not right. And as far as Rastafari, with you can use it in your place of worship. The first place of worship is me as a temple. The first place is when I rise in my home. So yes, they have these different things written in their law or whatever, but they were never done with the Rastafari culture in mind. It's smoke and mirrors, man. It just makes it look like they've done something, you know. So what are you complaining about? I mean, not complaining. Rastafari going still burn. I mean, regardless, the reality is that it's a culture, and you can't write a legislation to make it look fancy to justify what you really want to do is find a way to make money for some and marginalize others. That's why America has taken that position. The brother talked about Florida being the biggest consumers. Well, we right next door. We could be supplying them direct. I'm sure Michael would agree with that. Without question. So my thing is, as far as the money thing is concerned, you know, yes, the brother Robert, and I appreciate he sharing that. We do need a bank. If it's a national bank, I don't know. Maybe a private bank, a private investment bank might be the best way to go. I'm sure the rules and regulations, I'm not a banker technically, but I'm sure the rules and regulations, not a conversation. Listen, we can be all formal, all we like. The reality, the fact is, we need to have a candid conversation. I mean, simple candid conversation. I think Omari had a lot of good points. His Wi-Fi didn't allow him to really stream it that way, and perhaps the interjection, we didn't get a chance to hear him out, but I'm sure he had points. The point I really want to focus on is that if we're not serious dealing with the issues, you know, we have all the information. Michael is verse, Eric is verb. Robert got it down pat. I mean, Robert, I can listen to Robert. Robert got it down pat, but the reality is they're not going to acquiesce to us. We have to find our own way, and I agree with Sister Angela, as a collective thing, but not via CARICOM. The people on the ground, the traditional growers. The brother talked about St. Vincent. Big up to the man them. I won't call the names, but they know who they are. Shout out to Saboto as well. The reality is, I'm Professor O'Gara. Without question. You can't have this discussion, not be discussing it with Professor O'Gara. I'm surprised he's not even here. But anyhow, we got to be serious about it. And if we're not serious about it and talking one-on-one, how are we going to really fix this? Smoke and mirrors, man. And that's just the reality. We could do bartering in the meantime. You don't always have to use the resources of money. We could find ways to barter within countries. If we're going to be exporting to Europe, well, listen, we need some equipment. So it's not a monetary thing in a sense, but a value system. As far as product, break it down. Don't sell it as a raw product. America's into THC and CBD. And just for the record, one last point. You shouldn't rather use hemp to extract CBD. Hemp is a plant that absorbs toxins. That's the whole purpose of hemp. It absorbs all the toxins of the earth. That's what it does. But to use a plant that absorbs toxins, they use it for medicinal purposes. I don't know. It might not be the best source, if you follow what I'm saying. So yes, there's a lot of research that got to go into stuff. There's a lot of knowledge that Michael said again that we need to start sharing. Kevin mentioned as well. Let me sit down, compare some notes, man, and let me just, make this thing happen. Because if we don't do it right, if we don't start right, no matter what we do, it ain't gonna work. But I definitely want to thank everybody for really coming together and sharing. I mean, me personally, as Rastafari, traditional growers, that the brother said in St. Vincent, and I know a few of them working hard, and it works, but how? The reality is it can be so much better. But these larger countries obviously want to keep a regulation and control it. And Eric, you said it best. It's a colonial move, really and truly. And I respect you for that. And that's my
I just like to make a comment that we're all here because of the plant, and I'm so excited that we're all here for the plant. And thank you so much. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. I'm really mindful of the time. I'm so sorry. We have Prince Tulani, who it's almost 3 o'clock in the morning, so we definitely do have to wrap up. I want to especially thank Prince Tulani. As we know, it's wee hours in the morning, not even break of dawn there for him. So we appreciate your time with us. I want to thank Kevin Green. I want to thank Annette Henry, Marcus Rancasoon, David Hyde, Charles Rutherford, Douglas Gordon, who left early. He had another thing to get to. Amari Jackson, who dropped out and unfortunately was static, and we didn't really get a full sense of what Amari could have brought. Also want to thank Angela Knight, Dr. Mosley, Emmanuel. Thank you so much for your input. Robert Simmons, Eric Berlin, and Michael Patterson. Sarah, I wish to thank you for helping me pull this event together and expertly facilitating these sessions with me. This was a really informative session and somewhat bittersweet. And for that, I am still quite grateful. We were able to learn and take away a lot, some best practices, especially some of the things that Michael spoke about in terms of banking, some of the things that a number of you spoke to in terms of engagement. The regulatory, discussion on regulatory was really, really good. And I would be remiss if I didn't say this. I want to thank our outgoing CEO, who is now Senator Dr. Chantel Monroe Knight, who ensured that this panel discussion would take place, even though she wouldn't be able to be here. She was hoping to pop in, but I don't see her. She always said that we are a learning and reflective authority. And as such, she felt it important that we reflect on the work that we have been doing since we opened our doors as the Barbados Medicinal Cannabis industry on January 18th, and that we seek wisdom from best practices presented. And I think we were able to do so tonight. So I want to wish Senator Dr. Monroe Knight the very best in her future endeavors. I want to thank the BMCLA team for going above and beyond, whole day, all night, to assist in the technical and practical collaboration to ensure that this was a success. And lastly, I want to thank those of you who stayed up and joined us. I hope we were able to bring some insight into the industry. I really want you guys to, if you miss half of it, if you miss part of it, we're going to have it up on our YouTube channel. So please make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and see this and other things that we have up. Please check out our website at www.bmcla.bb. It's chock full of information, including the guides, the application guides, all the kinds of information you need to know. And also follow us on our social media platform. Search the BMCLA, and we're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Lastly, we always want people to know we have this concierge desk for a reason. It is to be a person, a face, a voice that you can reach out to when you need assistance. Anything to do with the BMCLA, anything to do with the medicinal cannabis industry, we are available, and you can reach us at clo@bmcla.bb. That's clo@bmcla.bb, or you can give her a call at area code 246-832-0975. Area code 246-832-0975. And with that, thank you again, everyone. Blessings and good night, everybody.
And thank you, Tracy. This couldn't have happened without you and the team. You guys did an amazing job in a really short period of time. So thank you very much. We deeply appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Tracy. You did well.
Great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Tulani.
Hi, bye.
Bye. Sleep well.
Right?
Thank you.